All right, welcome back to Hoop Hierarchy. This is KC coming to you with the next installment in the ranking all number one overall picks by their careers tier list series. So, if you haven't seen the series before, basically what it is, it's pretty straightforward. I'm just taking the players who went number one overall in the NBA draft all the way back to the beginning of the NBA and ranking them by how well they lived up to the hype of being a number one overall pick throughout their NBA career. It's just kind of a quick overview on each player and just kind of how their career progressed and why I think that they should be ranked in the position that they are ranked. So the tiers are going to be as follows. S tier is an elite, obvious Hall of Famer, exceeded expectations of being a number one overall pick. And A tier is probably a multiple-time All-Star that met the hype of being a number one overall pick. B is an acceptable, maybe pretty good player, but a minor letdown for the number one overall pick spot. A C is a solid-ish role player, but a disappointment for a number one. And F is bad, didn't play, or is just a huge disappointment in general. And so today, we're going to be touching on the number one overall picks from 1991 to 2000. So, starting that off, we're going to kick it right off with Larry Johnson. So, Larry Johnson was the Zion before Zion, so to speak. The hope is that Zion will avoid having a similar career path to Larry, because Larry was a McDonald's All-American in high school. He was wanted by SMU coming out of high school, but got involved in a dispute over his SAT and ended up at Odessa College, which is a junior college in Texas. And what should be considered no surprise to anyone, he dominated the junior college ranks and got a chance to transfer to D1 and play for UNLV. His career at UNLV was phenomenal. He won a championship and eventually individually won the Naismith Player of the Year award. He leveraged this success and got drafted number one overall by the Hornets. The start of his career was really promising. He won Rookie of the Year. He followed that with an All-Star appearance in 1993, but a back injury stunted his ascent to stardom and ended up transforming his game into a more role player type thing. But, you know, as another top pick who started strong and ended up injured, kind of like some of the guys in the past on previous tier lists, Johnson is one of the bigger what-if stories for recent number one picks there has been. And that's why he gets compared to Zion because, you know, he plays a lot like Zion does, very similar style, but there was always a concern for injury. And so, like I said, you hope that Zion ends up avoiding that and getting past these early career injuries and doesn't end up like Larry Johnson. But it certainly is possible, and there is a reason why those comparisons are made. But Larry Johnson is going to be B tier for me. He was good, but his prime wasn't nearly long enough to make that number one selection worth it. So yeah, Larry Johnson is going to go B tier. So next up, we are going to have Shaq. So this one really shouldn't be all that difficult. Shaq was kind of guaranteed to be good if he avoided the injury bug that hit a lot of the top picks before him that I discussed. He pretty much did that. A two-time All-American at LSU. Shaq was picked number one overall over Alonzo Mourning and Christian Laettner. He didn't take all that long to establish himself as an athletic, strong, and relatively quick big man. He averaged 23.4 with 14 boards as a rookie. His best season in Orlando, he was nearly a 30-point scorer while maintaining a high rebound rate and a high blocks rate. I think everyone will pretty much agree that his best years, though, were the ones in LA, where he bulked up even more, becoming just a huge interior force as he joined the Lakers alongside Kobe to win 3 straight championships in the late 90s, early 2000s, and became one of the better teams since the turn of the century. He then spent some productive years in Miami alongside Dwayne Wade, winning a championship there as well before rounding out his career on multiple different teams. Unanimously considered one of the best centers of all time with his career success rate, including a MVP and 4 championships. It is crazy to say that he is anything but S tier. So yeah, Shaq is going to be S tier. Next up, Chris Webber. So, with the greatly publicized Fab Five, Webber was part of a team that led a cultural shift to the game of basketball in the early 90s. His arrival didn't ever lead Michigan to the promised land of a championship, but it did shift how recruiting worked in the college basketball world. After some controversies with his recruiting and getting paid by a loan shark while in college, not a great look, but he made it to the pros after that, and he did really a pretty good job in all reality. He was a career 20-10 guy. He often gets slept on in the grand scheme of elite power forwards in the 90s and 2000s. Reason being that he really was never quite as good as, say, Karl Malone, Tim Duncan, Kevin Garnett in the era kind of that he was from. He was really a pretty great and productive player, though, in all honesty. He, especially in the 2000-2001 season, he averaged 27 and 11 for Sacramento. Over his career, he was a 5-time All-Star, 1-time All-NBA first-team player. He absolutely lived up to the hype of the number 1 overall pick spot. Do I think he is S-tier? Realistically, I'm going to say no. I think he was close, but I think the guys in the S tier are just surefire Hall of Famers with impeccable resumes. Weber doesn't quite fit that bill. He is easily an A tier player, though, which is nothing to laugh at. So, yeah, A tier for Chris Webber. Next up, Glenn Robinson. So, big dog Glenn Robinson was a well-liked and very talented player, especially for fans of basketball in the state of Indiana. He grew up in Gary, Indiana, and stayed local, going to Purdue University. He was really pretty unreal for Purdue, as in his junior season, he scored 30.3 a game and got 11.2 rebounds a game. So, first player since 1978 at the time to lead the Big Ten in both categories. While not winning a championship, he won just about every individual award he could in the NCAA before going to number one to the Milwaukee Bucks. Robinson came out the gate strong for the Bucks. He averaged 22 points per game and 6 rebounds. The only problem is he never really made a leap from that, as he basically stayed the same exact player his whole career. Yes, that's a very good player, a solid scoring piece for any team, and he made the All-Star game twice. But the entirety of his nearly decade-long prime, he basically averaged 20 a game with a point or two variation year over year. He managed to sneak in a championship in his last year playing for the Spurs. I think Glenn was really a pretty solid player. I think under most circumstances he would be close to A tier, but I think the fact that Jason Kidd and Grant Hill both went right after him, you have to compare him to those lofty standards. And I think Milwaukee, probably looking back, is a little disappointed with how Glenn turned out, looking in hindsight that they could have had Kidd or even Hill over Robinson. The Hill-Robinson debate, I could go either way, but Kidd was a better player than Glenn Robinson. Robinson, I say, is high B tier, but still B tier to me. Next up, we have Joe Smith. So, I'm sure some will argue that Joe Smith didn't have that bad of a career. He was the College Player of the Year at Maryland. He averaged 20 and 10 there, proceeded to go number 1 overall. Like most of these guys that go number 1, though, he started off relatively well. I would assume kind of a high usage rate type of thing, as his percentages were pretty poor, especially for a big man. But he did average over 16 for his first 3 seasons. He then proceeded to be both often injured and just, frankly, not that good for the rest of his career. The most excitement that there was for the rest of his career was the salary cap scandal he was a part of, where he signed really cheap with the Timberwolves after being promised a future big deal by them. He ended up staying as a role player for his whole career, which is fine in general, but when you're a career journeyman and the 4 picks after you are Tony McDyess, Jerry Stackhouse, Rasheed Wallace, and Kevin Garnett, who are all much better, I cannot classify you as anything but F. And yes, I know some people will say maybe C. He was a pretty good role player. I don't know. I mean, I think a lot of people too just consider Joe Smith to be one of those guys that's just kind of the quintessential definition of what a bust is. I mean, a couple of good years here or there does not live up to the fact that he just simply wasn't really close to a lot of the guys that went after him. Next up, Allen Iverson. So, as the high school player of the year in both football and basketball, AI was that guy from the beginning. Honestly, I mean, what else is there to say? Unfortunately, though, as many know, AI got caught up in a bit of a rough and unfair situation where he had to go to jail his senior year of high school and couldn't finish his high school career. He was successful enough that throughout his career that Georgetown still wanted to sign him, and a good decision for them because he won Big East Rookie of the Year. He led Georgetown far in the tournament in both the years he was there. Then when he decided to go pro, he became the shortest number 1 overall pick in NBA history at 6 foot. As everyone pretty much knows at this point, his height did not hold him back whatsoever. The answer became an MVP, 11-time All-Star, Rookie of the Year, 4-time scoring champion, all the while leading a 76ers team who, quite truthfully, was almost fully carried by him deep into the playoffs. Allen Iverson is an S-tier player. So next up, Tim Duncan. In another fairly easy one for me to classify, Tim Duncan certainly did enough in his career to be considered a good number 1 overall pick. Born in the Virgin Islands, Duncan wanted to be a swimmer growing up, but in his 9th grade of high school, a hurricane destroyed the only Olympic-sized swimming pool in his hometown. Because of this, he decided to pick up a basketball in its place, which turned out to be quite the decision for Tim as he managed to get a scholarship to Wake Forest. There, he earned a Naismith Player of the Year and stayed all 4 years to fulfill a promise to his mom before she died that he would graduate college. In 1996, he led the ACC in scoring, rebounding, field goal percentage, and block shots, becoming the first player in conference history to lead all 4 of these categories. After graduation, he was drafted number 1 by the Spurs. I could go on and on with what Tim did in the NBA, but let's just say 2-time MVP, 5-time champion, 3-time Finals MVP, 15-time All-Star, 10-time All-NBA first team. I mean, he was the best power forward in the NBA almost the entirety of his career, and in my opinion, is the best power forward of all time. Tim Duncan is S tier. Next up is Michael Olowokandi. So a much less successful pick than the last 2 players on this list. Michael Olowokandi has an interesting backstory nonetheless. He was born in Nigeria and moved to the UK with his family when he was 4. He was a talented track and field athlete there and had never touched a basketball until he was 17. However, he found interest in the sport and decided to play it in the US. He basically flipped open a book that had a list of United States universities and just landed on Pacific University. He called the coach for Pacific, told him he was 7'1", so the coach just said, there's no more scholarships, but you're welcome to come to the school and try out. And so he made the team, mainly because he was 7'1", and it was Pacific University, but he was not good. He was really, really bad at first. He didn't know the rules of basketball. He traveled all the time, backcourt violations, so on and so forth. But he did work hard enough to where he became really good in college. He averaged 22 and 11 as a senior and was All-American honorable mention. Due to the traits that he had and his quick progression, teams really wanted to draft him. He went to the Clippers number 1, but his hard work from college didn't seem to translate to the NBA. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who helped coach him for the Clippers, said he was talented but completely uncoachable. He became infamous for getting in trouble and being hurt alongside just simply not being very good. He was drafted over Vince Carter, Dirk, Paul Pierce. Does not help his case. He was bad. Michael Olowokandi is F tier. And I felt like with Joe Smith, I kind of had to justify the F tier. I don't think I have to justify it with Michael Olowokandi. His numbers were quite poor throughout his career. Next up, we got Elton Brand. So, Elton Brand is kind of a high school legend in his hometown. Brand was just insane in his high school years. He averaged 40 and 20, which obviously draws the attention of a lot of people, but namely Duke University, who added him alongside some other really talented players in his class. He was one of the main pieces of one of the more talented not championship teams in history in college basketball. He didn't stay very long, leaving as a sophomore to go pro. All things considered, his pro career was pretty successful. He had many years of being a 20 and 10 guy. He was a 2-time All-Star in the NBA. And that NBA was stacked with good power forwards. So, a 2-time All-Star, to fit yourself in to that group with, some of the guys I named before, Weber, Duncan, Garnett, with those type of guys in the league, that's really hard to find a way to put yourself into an All-Star game. But Elton Brand did it twice, so generally pretty unspectacular, but still good. I think he was a fine pick in the draft with quite a few all-star level guys, but no real Hall of Fame guys that were missed out on, except for Manu, who went 57th, but no one was taking Manu number 1, obviously. I would say that Brand is A tier. I think he's a fine number 1 selection, if unspectacular. Next up, we have Kenyon Martin. So, the final player for this video, Kenyon Martin, is a kind of like a lesser and more injured version of what Elton Brand became. Pretty unspectacular in general, but pretty decent at the same time. As a senior for Cincinnati, Martin averaged 18.9, 9.7, and 3.5 blocks per game. He did get hurt in his conference tournament that year, which unfortunately became kind of a sign of things to come. He went number 1 to the Nets, and he wasn't too bad as a rookie. He averaged 12, 7, and 2, all rookie first team. In future years, though, he kind of really developed knee issues. These injuries sporadically kept him out of games throughout his career. He was also known for having some conduct issues here or there. He got fined, suspended numerous times. Never quite the player that he was supposed to be coming out of college. He did enough to probably not be considered a bust, especially as while he was a bit of a disappointment offensively, he was still a great defender. But he wasn't quite what you want with the number 1 pick. So I'm going to say B tier for Kenyon Martin. And so that concludes the list. Like always, I appreciate it if you guys stuck out all the way to the end here on this one. I think we've got maybe 2 more of these tier lists, and I'm going to move on to a different topic. But, if you like these tier lists, go ahead and put it down in the comments. If you don't like the tier list, put it in the comments. I'm open to, obviously, criticism at all times. If you've got any ideas for future videos, please go ahead and put it in the comments as well. With all that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed this one.